Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, good afternoon everybody. Thank you for participating in this webinar. It's designed for reviewing some aspects of best practice in teaching, learning and assessment. Now, can I just confirm that everybody can hear me okay? If not, if you can type into the question box and let me know, we'll be able to do something about it. Excellent, thank you Gary, all good, excellent. Lovely, okay then I'll assume everybody else can hear me okay. Now I'd like you to ask questions as we go along. If there are too many for me to answer as we go through the webinar, then I will create a question and answer page and circulate it with the presentation, which will be emailed out to you afterwards over the next day or so. So my name's Alison Whatsize and I'm the Head of Service Teaching, Learning and Assessment for Ixion Holdings. I will at some point be out meeting all of the partners that we work with, looking forward to meeting you all and holding quality reviews with the contact we have for each of your provision. So the purpose of the webinar today is to raise awareness of the Ofsted perspective in teaching and learning and assessment sessions. It is not designed to go into absolute detail, but just to give you an overview and look at the basics of delivering a good session, look at effective planning, using a range of teaching and learning strategies, checking for understanding and progress, looking at how feedback's provided, and also embedding and promoting, which Ofsted expect us to do. There's an awful lot of additional topics that we need to be now embedding into teaching, learning and assessment, as well as the qualification subject criteria. So the Ofsted Common Inspection Framework is the framework which sets out how Ofsted inspects all types of learning provision. So whether you're delivering apprenticeships, traineeships, short adult learning courses, etc., etc., the same grading scale applies, and that's grade 1 to 4, 1 being outstanding, 2 being good, 3 being requires improvement, and 4 being inadequate. And I'm sure that you're all aware of those that grading scale. So whatever type of provision and however you're delivering, whether you're delivering one-to-one or group sessions, the inspection team from Ofsted will be inspecting and grading the same areas, which are leadership and management, the effectiveness of leadership and management, the quality of teaching, learning and assessment, and also personal development, behaviour and welfare, which is a fairly new aspect to the Common Inspection Framework. In addition, outcomes for learners, and there will be a grade for overall effectiveness. So all types of provision will be inspected under the same inspection framework, as I just said, whether you're an independent learning provider, you're a community learning and skills provider, and also employers funded by the ESFA to train their own employees, as well as schools and colleges, etc., etc. So, to deliver a good or outstanding teaching, learning and assessment session, impacts on the learner achieving and successfully completing a programme or course with us. So there's some basic things that we can do as teachers and assessors to kickstart the learning cycle, which you can see on the screen at the moment. These are just very basics, and they consist of checking the learning environment, making sure it's suitable, making sure that we're connecting sessions to previous and future sessions, Sharing planned outcomes of the session in a meaningful way, so make sure your learners know what to expect and what they should achieve through attending your session. We need to be presenting new information and skills through a variety of teaching strategies. So, for example, the use of active and physical learning activities, and making sure that always this session is learner-centred. You must then allow your learners to apply new skills and knowledge and demonstrate their understanding. Throughout the session, you need to be checking your learners' understanding and the progress being made, and make sure that you are checking for and allowing opportunities for stretch and challenge for your individual learners. At the end of the session, it's important to review how the session has gone and whether the outcomes have been achieved. So that really, by carrying out most of those very basic things, will contribute to providing an outstanding or good teaching and learning session. When you're delivering a new course I'm talking really about group learning, make sure that you include an icebreaker. That's always a good way to get your learners to interact with one another, get to know you and get to know their colleagues. So, what do we need to do to deliver a good or outstanding session? Well, effective planning and preparation is key. So whether you're delivering to individuals, maybe delivering apprenticeships, or whether you've got groups of learners, you still need to be planning for the session that you're going to deliver to make sure that you've incorporated all of the things that you're expected to incorporate from an Ofsted perspective to make sure that your learners get the best learning experience possible. That involves linking to initial and diagnostic assessment, any prior qualifications and learning experiences your learners have, while also considering personal development. You need to consider all of these aspects in order to agree appropriate SMART targets. So your SMART targets need to include development of English and maths, also looking at personal development, behaviour and welfare, which incorporates, in addition to English and maths, incorporates the employability skills required to either attain or sustain employment. It's perfectly fine to identify individual needs on your session plan and annotate those session plans to ensure that all your learners are supported to reach their full potential. Now, Ofsted wouldn't expect you to provide a session that was completely tailored to meet individuals in terms of detail, because that would just not be feasible. But what they do expect you to do is to make sure that you're planning, you're differentiating your activities, your language, for example, to make sure that every single learner is supported to reach their full potential. That includes stretching and challenging. So, for example, making sure that you've prepared additional resources to stretch and challenge quicker finishers. Check your resources that will be available in the classroom. Is there any technology available? How will it be utilised, if so? Also consider risk assessments required. So, for example, health and safety risk assessments or safeguarding risk assessments. In order to embed your English and maths, British values, equality and diversity, and also employability skills, where possible, you need to be planning to do that, as well as taking advantage of arising opportunities as you go along. So the teaching strategies that you use, whether you're delivering to groups or individuals, need to be inspiring your learners and sparking their curiosity, in the words of Ofsted. So the session needs to be well paced, use skillful questioning techniques, active learning through discussion rather than passive listening or reading, through discussion, feedback and activities. And you need to be connecting new information that you're providing your learners with what they already know. Make the learning relevant and explain the relevance. Make sure they understand why they're doing activities and what the topics and activities relate to in terms of the session outcomes and their qualification outcomes, as well as their targets that you've agreed with them. So if you're using groups, use group and paired discussions and activities as well as individual work. Role play, for example, interactive quizzes, which can be used also with individual learners, as well as technology wherever it's available. So these are just some ideas for teaching strategies. What we have on the ICSIAN Teaching and Learning Toolkit, which will be made available to you all through Intend, are some further ideas for embedding English and maths, additional teaching strategies that you can take and use as required. They're just designed to give you some ideas. The most important thing to remember is that your teaching strategies, teaching and learning strategies need to be learner directed. So during the session, you need to be making sure that you're checking for learner progress and understanding. Plan how this will take place throughout the session. Make sure that it's differentiated. The methods are differentiated according to individual targets and needs. Just some more examples here. So you could use a quick quiz. You could ask your learner to use post-it notes to record one or two things that they've learned, or get them to produce a précis or a summary of what they've learned. If you're teaching groups, you could ask them to deliver a short presentation on what they learned, say at the previous session that you delivered. Asking questions, using questions directed at individuals. Make sure that you're probing for fuller understanding. Another important aspect that Ofsted are particularly interested in is the effective feedback provided to learners, which needs to be constructive and it needs to be regular and timely. Provide verbal feedback as well as written feedback. Make sure it's at an appropriate level for the learner and the subject matter that they're studying. But above all, make sure that the feedback you provide is very clear and identifies what they need to do to improve. You also need to be absolutely sure that learners have improved and progressed as a result of the feedback you've provided. So there's absolutely no point in providing, written feedback, which is constructive, regular and timely, etc., if you're not absolutely sure that the learners have improved and progressed based on that. If, for example, you've identified spelling and grammar errors, make sure that they redo that piece of work or that section of work to make sure that they've clearly understood the feedback and managed to produce an accurate version of the text. So we talked a little bit earlier on about embedding various things within your delivery, and there is a requirement by Ofsted that where relevant, English, maths and other skills necessary to function as an economically active member of British society and globally are promoted through teaching and learning. Now, just touching on embedding and promoting English and maths, it's a lifelong concept. English and maths skills often fade if they're not used. So some ideas here to embed English. So to mark learners' work, identifying English and spelling and grammatical mistakes, the use of dictionaries in your sessions, and create some relevant spelling strategies and tips. Some mnemonics, for example. Create a word bank for keywords. And Actually, you're developing communication and speaking and listening skills through discussions or presentations. Some ideas for embedding maths. There are lots more ideas. We're only touching on this at the moment. And as I say, further information will be available through the Teaching and Learning Toolkit. But for example, if you're teaching a group of learners, split the group into various sizes and get the learners to feed back on the using division skills. Calculate marks into percentages. So if you did a quiz with your learners, and that's individuals or groups of learners, get the students to calculate their percentage, and then you could find a group average. So let's briefly look at embedding and promoting equality and diversity. Now, Ofsted inspectors don't expect all aspects of equality and diversity to be promoted as explicit features in every lesson. Inspectors want evidence that during a student's time at college or a learner's time at a provider, they will benefit from equality of opportunity. There should also be evidence that they will learn about the complex multicultural world they'll live and work in. Now that's taken from the Ofsted Myths handout with the link there so that you can access that yourself, and also the handbook, the Ofsted Skills Inspection Handbook. So some ideas here to embed and promote equality and diversity. So planning your sessions, designing courses that reflect the diversity of your group or your individual learner. Planning sessions to meet individual needs, using a variety of teaching and assessment methods to make sure that each learner has equal access to opportunities and participation. Where you are teaching groups, identify opportunities for learners to work collaboratively in their diverse groups. Whether you're teaching individuals or groups, make sure that learning materials do not discriminate against anyone and are adapted where necessary, for example, using large print or audio type format. Some more activities include holding themed weeks, for example, African Week, Islam Week or Disability Week. Observe multicultural events. Some examples there, Ramadan, Chinese New Year, etc. I'm sure that as providers, some of you have an equality and diversity calendar, which keep you well aware of all sorts of multicultural events that are going on throughout the year. Also, promote debate and discussion about current news events, for example, transgender, the gender pay gap, etc., etc. So now let's very briefly look at British values. I'm sure by now that you're all aware of what fundamental British values are defined as. So democracy, rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect and tolerance of those of different faiths and beliefs. Now, just to link British values to the PREVENT strategy, extremism is defined as vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance. I'm sure that you're all absolutely aware of the PREVENT duty, but there is a link there if you're not and you want to download it. But the PREVENT duty guidance requires that leaders and teachers exemplify British values in their management, teaching, and through general behaviours in institutions, including through opportunities in the further education curriculum. It's important that you accept that Ofsted now has a sharpened approach in what they're looking for in terms of British values. So under effectiveness of leadership and management, which is one of the aspects of the Common Inspection Framework, Ofsted will be looking to see how well the provider prepares learners for successful life in modern Britain, etc., etc. You can all see that slide very clearly. But it's important to remember that also Ofsted will be looking to see that the promotion of fundamental British values is at the very heart of the provider's work. So in terms of what else Ofsted will look for under effectiveness of leadership and management, the effectiveness of safeguarding practice, including the prevention of radicalisation of learners and compliance with the prevent duty. That is taken from the FE and Skills Inspection Handbook, which you have the link on a previous slide for. So the following few slides just describe what each British value actually means in basic simple language. So democracy, free and fair electoral process in the UK, the process in the UK to bring into force laws and legislation. So basically a democratic society is where everyone is treated equally and has equal rights, and able to express their preference as to how the country is governed. Rule of law is the legal system. It's about complying with legislation. And in terms of within a teaching and learning environment, it's about behaving within agreed guidelines and boundaries and understanding the consequences of not doing this. So individual liberty, in Britain we have individual liberty, we're very lucky. It's the right of an individual to exercise freely those rights generally accepted as being outside of government control. So freedom of speech, making choices. Mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. Well, mutual respect is when two people may not agree on everything, but they're willing to work things out because they respect for or care for one another. And it's a fair, objective and permissive attitude to those whose faith and beliefs may differ from one's own. So as an organisation, very similar to your own organisations, ICSIAN is committed to promoting and upholding the fundamental British values through a strong ethos of mutual respect for all races, cultures and religious faiths represented within our learner base. Through embedding into our programmes the development of our learners' self-confidence and self-awareness, and to support them in making choices. Allowing learners to make choices about their learning programme, their units, for example. And allowing and encouraging learners to take ownership of their learning. We ensure that our learners have a voice which is listened to in terms of feedback they provide and the activities that we carry out as a result of their feedback to improve our provision. We have company policies and procedures in place to ensure that we operate and comply with required legislation and defined boundaries. And I'm sure that you can all think of the different policies that we need in order to protect us from legislation. So, how do we embed and promote British values within teaching, learning and assessment? Well, just some ideas here, and I think really we've probably already covered it in the first few slides about British values. As I've just said, we listen to feedback, but it's feedback from other stakeholders as well as learners. So we support our learners' personal, social and emotional development by giving them opportunities to develop their self-confidence and self-awareness and make more effective choices and decisions. This all is in terms of relating to how we promote and embed democracy. In terms of mutual respect and tolerance, so whether in the workplace or the learning environment, everyone is required to comply with the Equality Act 2010, which is in place to prevent discrimination against those with the protected characteristics. Our code of conduct requires all of our learners to behave with tolerance and mutual respect towards one another. By maintaining these standards of behaviour during teaching sessions, our teaching assessors promote mutual respect and tolerance. We raise learner awareness and generate discussion about multicultural celebrations, religious events, and equality and diversity issues and contemporary issues. The rule of law. In vocational learning, for example, health and safety legislation is taught relating to roles, tasks and workplaces. So if you think of construction, you know how critical health and safety legislation is. If you think of hair and beauty, exactly the same, absolutely critical. Other vocational areas, absolutely critical that health and safety is understood. So the legislation around that relates to the rule of law. Employment law as well, and the rights that employees have, is another further opportunity to discuss how laws have come about through the democratic system and as a result of the use of the democratic system to achieve change. So some examples of embedding rule of law and democracy. The trade union pressure to introduce health and safety laws and employment protection laws. Pressure from businesses which want wants changes to legislation to make it easier for them to trade. Pressure from politicians, which comes about usually from constituents contacting them about various issues. And think of the public pressure, such as demonstrations, letter writing campaigns and petitions, and pressure through newspaper, TV, radio and social media campaigns to introduce new laws. Thinking of individual liberty, when discussing learner options after completing their courses, provides another opportunity to refer to individual liberty, as well as making choices about developing their careers or progressing to higher level qualifications or courses. So there's some links there which take you to the some information about specific vocational areas. There's a YouTube film clip for you to watch if you're interested. Fairly light-hearted look at British values. You won't be able to access the link to the Teaching and Learning Toolkit, but we will provide that through Intend, as I said earlier. So that's really a whistle-stop tour through some aspects of delivering a good or outstanding teaching, learning and assessment session. By all means, absolutely not detailed, but I do hope that you've benefited from it. And please feel free now, if you have any questions at all or you'd like further information, please feel free to type them in. Okay, well, it doesn't look as if we've got any questions from anybody at this point, but thank you so much for participating, and I will make sure that you all receive the presentation slides as well as various other handouts which I feel might support you. Thanks very much, everybody.